culture change. Today's webinar is all about culture change and how we can manage culture change effectively. The learning outcomes, or the topics that we're going to cover, and I will be going through this in a reasonable degree of pace, but there's plenty of other materials that you can refer back to. So we're going to do a whistle stop tour through the 5 change superpowers of being a change superhero. We're going to look at Kotter's 8-step change process about leading change, which I find really useful, particularly when you're managing culture change. We'll talk about the essentials of having a core change team, and a bit about stakeholder analysis and the change equation. So actually there's loads of content here. I will aim to, as ever, trying to make it interactive too, and I hope it doesn't bamboozle you too much. I hope I'm not going to hit you with too much info, but as I say, all of these things you can come back to. And in fact, if this is something that's really relevant and interesting to you, you might be interested in it, because there's a lot of it, certainly the 5 superpowers, well, in fact, all of it is featured in the book that I launched last year, which is How to Be a Change Superhero. So that's where a lot of the models and things are explained in more detail. So if you do find that this is whetting your appetite and you're interested in knowing more about it, then you can go and find out that. There's more there. Just introducing myself to those of you who are new and haven't met me before. So my background is corporate learning and development. To be honest, it was an organisational development role, like some of you on the call, but it was probably too early for people to know what OD was. In fact, when I first set up and called myself an OD, organisational development consultant. It said OD consultant, and the number of people who looked at my business card back in the day when we used to meet people and look at business cards and say, oh, you're an odd consultant. What's that? So I think now people understand that it's OD, but yeah, I'm old enough that people thought I was an odd consultant. So I'm also a chartered psychologist. I don't practice avidly other than in terms of business psychology like this. You're here because I'm the founder and CEO of Actus Performance, Talent and Learning Management Software. So we run these as part of our value-added services to clients and people generally out there in terms of thought leadership. You may have come across me through the HR Uprising podcast. Again, if you haven't, that's got lots of podcast episodes all about change and culture change. So we regularly do things on that, and I've had some great speakers on this topic. So if you want to learn more, there's always information you can find there. In terms of just helping you understand, we used to do these webinars and I'd never talked about what Actus did, and then we realised that lots of people didn't know, and people would ask me afterwards. So just to help you understand, in case you didn't know, and in case you might know somebody who needs something like this, Actus software it originated as performance management software, so objective setting and appraisals and development, etc. But we now offer a full suite, whether it's compliance you're after, whether you need a learning management system. We've also got a series of e-learning and things as well. That's extended this week, Talent Management 360, onboarding, and HRIS. So if you're ever looking for software to manage your people better, so HR software, but actually about people management, that's what we specialize in. And then over the last 12 months, since we moved to working remotely, I've almost gone back to my previous training roots, which has been brilliant fun. So we do lots of training. We do a hybrid management program, which probably run about 600 or 700 people have been through this, which is a 4-module program all about people management 101, but looking at people management in a remote or hybrid environment. I also run the Change Superhero course as a training course. So if we do have people on here and actually you're thinking, I need to get really practical about a change that I'm managing in my business, the next open course of that happens in September, and it's the discounted prices, early bird prices available, and that is a really small bunch of people working really in depth and applying some of these principles to your own organization. And there's also Actus Academy, which is on-demand e-learning. So you don't need to have an LMS platform. We've got a variety of management and change courses there. So those are the sort of things that we do in our day job. But let's crack on and talk about, see what we're here to talk about here. I'm trying to look at where we've got Katrina's from Dorset. You're in banking regulatory compliance. Ah, interesting. You have to deal with SMCR there, Katrina. That's one of the things we've been working with people in regulatory compliance. I don't know how I pronounce your name. Is it Olga? Olga, that's an interesting name. You're in commerce, you're a lecturer with interest around. So is that HR? You're an HR lecturer? Is it workforce planning and developing healthcare leaders in the new normal? Well, that's interesting as well. This morning I was training CCG, which new to be people in a CCG on virtual management training. So really important areas, isn't it? For healthcare, always changing. If you're in the NHS, I think it's an absolute core aspect to understand how to deal with change and to manage change. So Peter Senge quote is this: people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And you could just see that as a trite quote, but actually I think it's really, really valuable to think about what this means. What this really means is that when we have challenges helping people through change, or they appear to be resistant, it's because of how it's being managed or how it's being communicated, as opposed to the problem being with them. And I see, if we want to be change superheroes, there's so much we can do in terms of helping people come to terms with change or buy into change that can make a massive difference. Lecture and leadership. That sounds really interesting. Okay, so what I thought I'd do, just to get us warmed up, is a little poll, just to say, what's your usual response to change? Now, I'm predicting we might have lots of people here that love it if you're all involved in change and interested, but maybe you're here where you can take it or leave it, or maybe you hate it and you're here because you're wanting to work out how to get used to it or come to terms with it. Let's see what we think here. This is interesting. So I've got 44% of you voted. Hopefully you should just be able to click on it and vote. It'll be quite straightforward. Totally, Colin. So usually the people who feel like they're being resistant is because they haven't been involved. They've been, all the people who are the change agents were racing through it and were involved in the change from the start. They haven't been, they feel like it's been done to them and they just don't understand why. And that's why people resist. You're absolutely so right. Change is the only constant in the business world. My word, we've had so much change, haven't we, over the last couple of years. I don't think it's going to stop either. Great. Okay, so I'm up to 71% of you voting. So final, people, cast your votes now. Work out how to use the voting. I'm going to end the polling. 3, 2, 1, and end it. One person hates it, and most of you have said you love it, and 33% or 11 have said they're neutral. So we've got about 50 people here, but we've got 33 who voted. So what does that mean? Why is that relevant? I just thought it's useful because I know that there are people that I work with who really adapt naturally, easily to change, and people who like change, and there are people who actually naturally hate change. And the reality is, quite a lot of you, I would say you probably almost got a bell curve. There's probably as many people who hate change as those who love it. And interestingly, on this call, sorry, let me share the results with you. Most of you who voted say, do you love it? So why is that useful to know? I think it's useful to know because you might find that you race around acceptance and a change curve. You're a great person to be a change agent, so leading change, inspiring with others, but you might find that sometimes you are way ahead of everybody else and you may have to slow down and help others through it, particularly those that don't like change. And of course, at the moment, as per a number of you talking about this here, we know that it's a good time for us to learn how to do change better. How can we manage change better? Kotter is quoted as saying 70% of change initiatives fail due to people issues, and that's a really old quote. But you know what? I've been through, and when I wrote the book, I went through to see whether or not this is still the case. And there's lots and lots of evidence that suggests that we're still not particularly good at dealing with change or managing change. Those of you in the NHS, again, because one of the challenges in the NHS is that you have one change on top of another. So when we talk later about the change, Kotter's change model, you find that you've not made it all the way through the last change before the next one comes in. And that can end up actually making us perform at a lower level. You can see here all about coronavirus quotes there, where we can be conscious of the impact here in terms of the change of coronavirus coming into the lockdowns, our working practices changing, and of course now where we're potentially going back to a hybrid working model. So what are the 5 superpowers of a change superhero? If any of you heard me talk about this before, or have you read the book or aware of what they are? I'm interested if this is brand new to you or if you've seen them before. These are the 5 superpowers that I've identified if you want to be a change superhero. And these are the skills that you can work on and develop. And once we're aware of them, it's working how all of us will have natural strengths. And at the end of this bit, I'll actually ask you, which one do you think is your natural strength? And which one do you think you'd like to develop more of in terms of being a really well-balanced change superhero? So we've got courage, connect with strategy, corroboration, communication, and collaboration. So when I'm talking about courage, and this is key if you are in a change role, it is about leading change. It's about you feeling willing to almost stand up and put your head above the parapet, because the change might not be positive or might not be positively viewed for certain people. So what that does mean is that we need to have the courage to develop our emotional intelligence. So those bullets there are all aspects of emotional intelligence that you might have heard of, that Daniel Goleman did lots of work on. So are we aware of how we feel about that change and how we're responding to it? If we have people who are responding in a very negative way, or even if we don't feel positive about it, we've got to have the self-control and the resilience not to let that bring us down, and to make sure that we are able to portray the positives of the change. We need to have drive and self-motivation to bring people with us, to engage with others. We need a level of energy really to go out and talk to others about leading change, or it's about even being supporting in change. So we need to have the courage really to stand up and be counted. And the other aspect for me that I think is really key if you are a change agent is we need to have the courage to challenge people, and sometimes they're senior to us, to challenge people that are not actually coming with us. So I've used an example in the book where we had a key stakeholder in the business who had a habit of almost undermining a change. So we might need to go and talk to somebody ahead, maybe someone who's on the leadership team, and say, we're going to be promoting this change, we're going to say these messages, and can you give me your commitment that you're going to be on board with it? Maybe even spell out what they do. And if people pull against it, that particularly those who should be role models or leading it, maybe we have to have the courage to challenge them and call out those bad behaviors. Because the problem is, a lot of the time, to drive the change, a lot of the time change agents are in the middle of the organization, and then you have somebody who is a sponsor who can either lead that change and absolutely role model it, get behind it, say all the right things, or they can be passive. And that makes a huge difference to how well the change goes down and to what extent people buy into it. Have any of you had that issue where somebody's undermined something you've been involved in when they shouldn't have done? Oh, Colin, I agree with everything you're saying. I'll come back to your points. So the second aspect of this is helping people understand the why. And this is really about inspiring people to understand the rationale behind something. So if it's a positive change, you can create a vision of a positive future for them. But if it's something they see as a negative change, it's telling them almost, well, if we didn't do this, this is what might happen. Because generally change is decided on and it's happening for a reason. Sometimes it's being done to a business or to an organization, but change is being done for a reason. And if we understand why that is, it makes it easier for people to process it and basically come with it. You've had that, have you, paying teacher? That is such a, I'm not sure if that's your name, but you've definitely had this experience. Ms. Smoot, you have had someone undermine it. So frustrating, isn't it? So the other reason as a change leader is we connect with strategy, so we inspire people so they can see the future as to why you're doing something, but then also we need to be able to break it down into manageable steps. So if any of you are Myers-Briggs qualified, for example, so you've got your N vision bit, but you also have your sensing step by step, because we've got to help people understand the route to the vision. The third one here is corroboration, and I just closed down the most recent change superhero group, that training group, and I was we do a 360 feedback with them on change. I was doing some of the feedback yesterday, and corroboration is the one that most of them went, actually this would make all the difference getting people to buy in, this is something I need to do more of. So what I mean by corroboration, it's effectively providing evidence to help people understand why they need to change. So it could be about using things like case studies. So if you were to look outside, so this is talking about influencing. So you might, okay, if you said influencing shortcuts, there's 6 different influencing shortcuts, which is the work done by Cialdini, which again we write about here, and he talks about 6 influencing shortcuts. And what we find very often with corporate communications or overall business communications is that there's not a lot of color in it. It's quite gray. We don't really provide evidence as to why something is happening. And what I'm saying here is just by a little bit of thinking about influencing people, you can enrich your communication. And by doing so, it makes it easier for people to buy into a change. So, for example, appealing to authority, you might be something, there's a government legislation. We've got somebody on here who's responsible for compliance. So if the FCA tells you to do something, or in banking, or the PRA, then that's an authority which would make people think, oh, I think I've got to do this. If you're in a public sector, then it might be something the government says. If you're interested in changing your own behaviour, it might be a health, something that you think, which is a health authority, World Health Authority or something. Now, that's not quite the same as social proof. Social proof is where someone you know has done something like that. So it might be where, if I was in an NHS trust, I've also got NHS in my head because I was working with them this morning, then you might say, well, actually, Imperial University did it this way, Hospital Trust did it this way. Or it might be your friend Joe Bloggers down the road did it this way. Or it's also social proof is things like TripAdvisor or Glassdoor. It's basically, or Amazon reviews. It's having those sort of social proof of other people, but the key is they have to be other people like you. So that's why a case study, oh gosh, Colin, it's where the case studies would appeal in that way to show people. So you say, actually, it was demonstrated in a similar Harvard Business Review showed something. That's probably an authority. And another influencing shortcut is reciprocation, which is saying that actually, although I appreciate you might not want to do this, I'm going to change your working pattern for argument's sake, and ask you to work, 10 days solid and then have X number of days off. You might offer people something in exchange for that. But again, it needs to be something that they see of value. So you might offer them more holiday, or you might offer them different working times or different shift patterns. It's giving someone something in exchange for whatever it is that needs to happen. It's like the upside. So we're going to have to make this change, but the upside, what we'll get back is this. So corroboration is just about thinking a bit more rather than simply saying what is the change we need to do. It's thinking about how we can influence people to understand why, or even to think that that change is necessary or even a good idea, and working by giving them more evidence. Communication, I mean, this is a no-brainer. People buy from people. People like people. Change fails down to people. So it is about making sure that we communicate way more than we think we're going to do. Kotter says that we should communicate change 10 times more than we think we need to. So, and we generally, and again, this is one of the challenges. If of those of you, most of you on here either love change or are neutral about it. So what that means is you would probably be convinced to make a change much more rapidly than someone who's resistant to change. And you might not realize, and say you're whooshed through that change curve, and you don't realize that actually the people who are less bought into it are way behind. And so really what this is about is realizing that we have to keep communicating and nudging other people through change curve. I'm not talking about the change curve today. I have done other webinars on that if that's something you're not quite sure what I'm talking about. But in terms of our communication style, we need to be flexible, we need to be effective listeners. And occasionally when we're managing people through this change curve, where you go into things like, talk about resistance and denial, if people are in a stage of resistance, then they might start making generalizations about, oh, this is no good for anybody, or you always do this, I can't believe this is happening, where people overgeneralize or distort the information. So we have to be alert to making sure that people have accurate information and the hearsay doesn't go through. And then finally, collaboration for me is absolutely vital. You cannot make change on your own. You have to take others with you. And if you're in an organization that's anything bigger than about 30 or 40, you're going to need a team of people to do it. I mean, probably even with 30 or 40, you're better having a team. So you need to build a change team around you. And in order to collaborate with others, sometimes we are attracted to people who are the same as us or very much like us, but actually it's useful to think about having differences in a change team. And I'll mention a little bit more about that in a moment. So in terms of collaboration, it's building on strengths with each other. It's always being positive. It's about talking we, and it's encouraging people to come with us. And I'm saying build your own change league in terms of our superhero analogy. Make sure you've got a whole range of people. If you think of your Marvel league, that make sure you've got all of these people who've got different talents and strengths, which are suitable for different purposes. And that is what I'd be saying here is if you are building a change league, I've used the model here, which is based on Belbin team roles. I haven't got all of them in, but I've got most of them. So let me know in the chat, have you come across Belbin team roles? If not, again, you can go and have a look at this. But Belbin, it's been around since the 60s, and Meredith Belbin defined he defined 8 team roles initially, and then actually added on a 9th one. And these roles, he said, are what you need in an effective team. Usually any one of us is competent at 2 or 3 of them, but no one is really good at all 8 of them. And he would say that all of 8 or 9 of these roles need to be covered in an effective team. And when I thought about it, I thought, actually, that makes a lot of sense in terms of an effective team, but you don't need all of the roles all of the time. And so if I was thinking about delivering change, what you really want is different strengths at different stages in the change, especially if it's a large scale change that you're doing. So Monica's familiar with it. Is anyone else familiar with Belbin? Is this completely new to people? I'll quickly tell you what they are, and then you'll understand why that is. So what I'm suggesting here, okay, more of you are familiar but not used. So the key about it is, for me, is so your different roles are, a coordinator is basically somebody, exactly as the word says, who's good at coordinating, good at organising others. Resource investigator is someone who's an ideas person, and they're good at pulling in outside resources, whether they are people or whether they're things. So they're very good at starting things. Natural strength of a resource investigator is starting. And Belbin talks about allowable weaknesses. So the allowable weakness of a resource investigator is finishing. They're not very good at closing things down and finishing things. So as you can see, I've got them at the start of the activity. And then the shaper is a typical person who's quite a more of a dominant leader. So there's a similarity between the shaper and the coordinator, but the difference is the coordinator likes to organize people, whereas the shaper likes to drive goals and targets. It's more about getting the job done. So they provide a sense of urgency. So if you've got people in your team, and remember, often when we're delivering a change, you'll get people in your team because they are technical specialists, because they do a certain job or they have a certain knowledge. What I think is useful is then if you have an awareness of their personality, it doesn't have to be Belbin, but you have an idea of, are they good at starting? Are they good at finishing? Maybe thinking of bringing people in at different times. Or if you're getting some supplementary people, if you've got lots of people with the same strengths or preferences, maybe consider bringing in different strengths to help you through it. Yes, Colin, I think plant could be in the beginning as well. So plant, there you go, Juliet and Colin on the same thing. So Colin and Juliet are saying you want plants in the beginning. Plants, one of the most unusual ones to have there as a title. I don't really know why you came up with plant, but basically plants are ideas people. So you would, if you were trying to solve problems, you need to get them. And sometimes they're quieter, so you'd need a coordinator to give them the opportunity to talk, to speak up, make sure they're not spoken over too much by maybe the shapers and resource investigators. And Juliet's saying bring, well, it's an idea he came up with it, isn't it, Meredith Belbin? He's still going strong. So also monitor evaluators are super valuable at the beginning. Okay, so that's a fair point. So tell me why, Juliet, you'd see to put them in at the beginning. I guess the logic there, so monitor it, those you'll run through for people who don't know which is which. So implementers are good at getting the job done. So they are your workhorses, and they will kind of push forward with things. So often where people start to lose interest, they will keep going, and they would be useful through to the end of a change. Team workers, exactly as sound, they're harmony, they promote harmony, they smooth over things, they're helpful, and you know, going to work well with people. And then I've got monitor, evaluate, and completer, finisher at the end. So completer, finisher, they're going to drive through to completion. They like to get things closed. Monitor, evaluator is about dotting the I's and crossing the T's and thinking about things thoroughly. So Juliet's saying, she says that a monitor evaluator's got a strategic view, and is going to identify risks and balance out ideas. And I think that's actually a really valid point in terms of change. When we look at the Kotter model, the 8-step model, sometimes you find that change fails because it hasn't been thought through properly in the first place. And so, as Juliet's suggesting, that actually if you've got someone who's got a bit of monitor evaluator in them earlier on, then that's also going to be helpful. So completely, it doesn't map on totally, but these, you can see there is this natural strength at different parts of this. And remember, the average person has 2 or 3 strengths that they can bring out. So it's about switching those on at the right time in the process. So I've talked there about the 5 superpowers. We've just gone into the Change League, which is fitting into the collaboration superpower. Just to get you involved again, let's just do a poll and see which ones you think are your, let me stop sharing those to be able to show the next one. Which is your strongest is what I'm going to ask you in a moment, and which one do you think you would like to develop? So which superpower do you already use regularly? Would you give yourself the credit for being the strongest? And after that, we'll see what you think you're next up, and then we'll see which one you would want to do to develop. Give me a chance to have a quick water. Quite even. Okay, I'm up to 60%. Anyone else going to choose? That's it. Oh, whizzing up. Great. Keep going. 70%. That everyone's going to vote, because I think I had that number last time. I think all my voters might have voted. Anyone else? Vote, vote, vote. Can't see who. We can't see what you're saying, by the way. That's it. Be brave. Go on. Go for it. It's anonymous. 76. Here we go. Here we go. Right. If I 80%, I'll stop. Okay, let's go for it. 78, one more, and I'll get to 80%. One more person vote. Okay, I'm going to end it. So, share the results. So we're quite even, and actually, interestingly, this is similar to what the group I was working with before. So most of you are seeing that communication and collaboration are your strengths, following up with courage, and then we've got connect with strategy and corroboration, and maybe the ones you might want to do more of. I am going to assume that it's the inverse, save us time rather than doing the second poll, that it probably therefore that more of us would benefit from the corroboration piece, and maybe the connecting with strategy that's going to be the inverse probably of the one you might want to develop. You can do that in your own head as well, can't you? So I'll stop sharing the results. So there's quite a lot of content in here that I'll whiz through the rest of it. So what makes change fail? These are the things that traditionally affect change. Again, tell me in the chat if any of these you particularly agree with, or tell me if there's something that is missing from that list. But I think if you look at these are my experience where things haven't been thought through. That's your monitor evaluator comment that Juliet came up with. Sometimes it's not enough drive, there's not no goals. Maybe we don't know what we're trying to achieve. Sponsorship, resistance, lack of follow through. So those are things that I've experienced. And this you can see when you map it onto the Kotter change model makes sense. So building up to the Kotter change model, this is based on Lewin's research, which talks about unfreezing organizations, saying in order to, because we're talking here about culture change, in order to make a change in an organization, we almost need to unfreeze. So it's almost, imagine you've got your ice cubes in a Father Christmas shape. We need to let it melt into water again. So unfreeze, make the change, and then you can refreeze it into a donkey shape. I have no idea where I got those from, but let's just say if you wanted to change those. So it's thinking about, we have to unfreeze the organization before we make the change. Now, there's things that we can do to think about how easy that's going to be. You could look at doing something like a force field analysis, whereas you might look at your organization and see how many positive forces have we got for this change. You know, are we always tracking in this direction? Do people want to go in this direction? And how many blockers do we have? And that gives you an idea about how much work you're going to need to do to actually make that change, to make that progress. And it's also quite useful just to take that step back and think about your stakeholders, who's on board with things, who's not, and even the environment and all those things around it. So you can think about that, and you can also think about things like the change equation here, which again is thinking, if I want to make a change in my organization, how much would people want to do that? So it's thinking, how happy or unhappy am I with the status quo? How attractive is the future goal? How easy or difficult is the change, and how much personal or financial cost is there to it? And that's basically, that equation is going to tell you how easy that change is going to be. If I'm really fed up with the current way of going, and the future looks absolutely bright and I can change it dead easy, at no cost, then change is I'm going to make it much faster than if it's the converse of that. But these are often, it just helps you think, what do I need to influence? So if you think, okay, everybody's pretty happy with how things are, and the future vision isn't all that, then maybe what you need to do is really work on making that future vision more attractive, or ensure that the change you're making is incredibly easy and low cost, and just being realistic about the things that are going to make it easy or hard. Yes, good point, Colin. So Colin's saying, how powerful are each of those forces? Because on this image here, all those arrows are created equal, but of course in the real world they're absolutely not. You could have loads and loads of driving forces and just a couple of restraining forces, but one of them happens to be the biggest influencer in the organization. It could be a personality, and quite often it is, and that could really become a blocker. And what you need to do there is actually go and work on that person. So then, sort of going towards the close here, is Kearns of Kotter's change model. How many of you come across Kotter's change model? This is his 8-step change model, and this works really well on organizational change. He wrote a book, I want to say, is it Our Iceberg is Melting? That's the name of the book. I think it is. I was thinking of Who Moved My Cheese then, which is also about change. In terms of this, what I've done is I've laid over the top this concept of unfreezing, making the change, and then refreezing in terms of this 8-step model. So what we're saying here is, to unfreeze it, we need to establish a sense of urgency. So this is where you think, I need to work out, what is the future vision? Is it a major issue? Is it a negative if we don't do something? Or is it a massive opportunity that I want to take advantage of? You then want to get your group of people, which may well be lots of you guys that are on this call, large enough to lead the change. So you're defining the change, you've got your people defining it, your plants coming up with the ideas, your monitor evaluators looking at risks. If you've got the right people in there at this stage, then you're going to increase your chances of a successful change. You then need to start creating that compelling vision. So whether it's a crisis or an opportunity, we need to work out, really, you're defining how to message to people what the future is looking like. You get to that stage and you've unfrozen. Now, the interesting thing about this is, it's at this stage, it's only here at step 4 that we start talking to other people about the change. And this is why people think that change is being done to them. Depending on the size of the change, you could have had somebody who has been working on the change, defining that change for 3 months, and then you communicate it. But those people who are being communicated to, they didn't have the inside track. And unless we communicate it enough, going back to that point I made earlier about communicating change 10 times to make it feel valuable to people, you need to use every single method to communicate it as many ways as possible. One email, one town hall is just not enough. And communication also means listening to how people feel about the change, allowing people to process it. So you make the change, you communicate it. We then need to remove obstacles, empower others, change systems or structures that undermine the vision. So you need to start making it realistic that the change can happen, and that change equation could be there where you think the ease of it, what do we need to remove to make it easier, or your stakeholder analysis, your force fields, what do we need to do to remove or increase the force fields? And then we get to this point of creating short-term wins. And that's very useful here to start talking about short-term wins, because those people who haven't bought into the change yet and they're digging their heels in denial, those people are thinking, okay, so it's still happening, is it? So you get through this stage where you're making the change, you communicate the short-term wins, but then this is what many people don't do. They don't consolidate the change enough, where you add to it, you embed the systems, and then anchor them, where you communicate the link between performance improvement and change. You put in place things like monitoring, you maybe build on the change. So you might, let's say you've put in a performance management system, you've rolled out the objectives, maybe now you roll out the development or the recognition piece. So you build on whatever it is. So you further embed that behavioral change as business as usual. So in which stage, my question to you is, at which stage do you think change tends to fail? And you can choose more than one. So I'll leave it up to you up there for you. Which stage do you think changes tend to fail? And I've used to train this out for Siemens when I was a trainer at Siemens. And so I probably walked through this with over 100 different people discussing 100 different changes. And I can tell you that there are, of where they typically fail, in 2 places is where it's typically fail, which I think is quite interesting. It is anecdotal, so your answers, you can't get it wrong, and I say it's anonymous anyway, but I'll tell you the areas that I think you have to be really quite careful. Yes, you can, Monica, you should be able to choose more than one, unless you didn't put it as multi-choice by accident. It says stages. Can you only do one? Oh, sorry. All right, sorry about that. That was an error in my poll creation. All right, choose your top one then. Okay. If you were going to choose more than one, you can put in the chat which one you were going to go for. Right, so I'll share the results. So you've gone quite spread actually, but what I will say, and this is only anecdotal, so I'm not saying that I'm right, so any of you could be right, and obviously you've experienced your own changes, but where I found that changes tended to fail were at the transition points on both of them. Now you're right, Kamala, about the last two. That's because often people don't do this bit, so they do the short-term win. So really what would happen is here the leaders would communicate it, they'd tell people to change, but then they wouldn't do anything more than that. So it's almost like the change would stop there. So it would break down because we've just talked to people, but we haven't then gone on to do the others. So it's almost you haven't made the change. You think they've thought about the change, they've planned the change, they've told people to change. It's just not the same as people actually changing. And the other area is you'd get here and people were not consolidating it. So I guess if you've gone short-term wins or consolidated, same sort of thing. It's basically at this point, sorry, you can't see where my cursor is. So I was indicating at this space here between unfreezing and change and between change and refreezing. This is where a lot of the changes would not happen because again, here you get to the point you've pushed through and then we don't actually turn it into business as usual. And what happens there, if you think about this, this could be a curve, then people fall back into the old way of doing things. So, and that's the other thing is, or we bring in another change. And quite often they get just up to the point of short-term wins and bring in another change initiative, which takes people on the change curve again. And actually we lose focus on the original change. We never embed it properly and we end up being worse off. So that refreezing at the end is so important, but often doesn't happen. And communicating it and then moving it on to the next level. It does, doesn't it, Emily? It really, really does. And what I was suggesting to think about here is if this is your role as a change agent, is what you could do depending on where you are through the change. So at the start, it's about making sure people understand why the change. Second point, we're talking about including the right people. So we've talked about our parallel, about our change league, helping to get through it. Make sure the vision is exciting and relevant. Here's about communicating it well. So make sure there's enough communication and also get a compelling senior sponsor to share and lead and inspire it. This piece here is about making sure that we keep momentum, because this is what happens. And that's why I'm saying here, if you keep momentum and refocus people, shout about the short wins and then turn it into business as usual. So don't stop once you've started to get the first bit to work. Make sure you are embedding the change. And that's where I think use those different people with different skills, bringing implementers and completer finishers to drive through. Businesses that I've, how can you use it? R&D. Well, funny enough, I haven't put a case study on because there's just too much information on it, but we used it with a number of clients where we've rolled out our system with them. And one of the ones I thought was most effective, they actually rolled it out to 5,000 people within 6 weeks, or certainly got the point. They got as far as the change happening, communicating it and rolling out within 6 weeks, which was pretty rapid. But what they did particularly well was they then made iterative changes, and they then swapped out their change team and they brought in the HR admin lady who was quite an implementer type person. It was different personalities between the guy who led it and then the lady who was the HR administrator, and she was responsible for relentlessly making sure that people were using it. They were gathering the training needs analysis through it. She'd provide results to the board about it, and that's what's anchored the change. So for me, Kotter's model is useful for large scale change. When you're taking a group of people, it's talking about coalition, so it's very useful for culture change. Whereas if you're talking about personal change, you might be thinking about how people respond emotionally to change. So this is just areas, some practical things. So make sure you've got monitoring and checks, and make sure with the culture change, it doesn't happen over, you're talking about 1 to 3 years, if not more, in very large organizations. the same change people are going to lose energy, or they'll get pulled onto another more exciting, newer project, which is why it is useful to bring in new blood, in my opinion. So change superheroes, just summarising what we've covered. They have the courage to initiate or follow change. They're good at communicating the why of the strategy for change. They persuade rather than tell people change using evidence, so it's corroboration. They're flexible in communicating change, listen and respond to their audience, and they're collaborative and encourage teamwork. So that's the end of the session. If you've got any comments or questions, please drop them in the chat. Caitlin, have we got a questionnaire or a feedback? Oh, actually, was it in here? I've got a questionnaire here. I've got a few other things just to show you what's coming up next. Hopefully it was of use to you. This is the next webinar. The next webinar we're talking about successful hybrid working. And we're going to talk about dealing with performance issues in July. We're taking a break in August. Running an open demo. If anyone is interested, I mentioned the software at the start. If you want to see it and just want to have a little look quietly but do an open demo, I am running one of those on the 1st of July. And actually, if you are interested in that, I'll just put that up. You can indicate in the poll. The remote management training programs I've already mentioned. And as ever, there's lots of useful resources on our website. There's links to all of these, and we'll send this out to you automatically. I think these are live links, so if there's something that you want, you would be able to access it. Okay. And if you have a moment to give us some feedback on the Google, Caitlin's just dropped the Google Docs form into the chat. And these are your various other things in terms of our webinars, any of the broader links there. Thank you so much for joining. Do link in with me if you, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that. So connect with me on social media. It's always good to grow the groups and maybe connect with each other. But thank you so much for joining. Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.